Does God exist? Simple question, right? Today we're going to tackle it, and this is a question that people have been trying to answer for a long time, since humans have been around, both with strong opinions, both for the existence of God and against the existence of God. If you're somebody that's interested in the great questions of life and the mysteries of this universe of existence, be sure to subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell, and be sure to like this video to get these messages out to as many people as possible who are eager to learn about philosophy, theology, or any of the other mysteries that are included within those subjects. My name is Edgar Ortega, and today I'm going to show you three philosophical arguments for the existence of God. There's arguments against the existence of God in philosophy and for it, and today I'm going to show you three that have been used throughout history in different versions and have been debated back and forth, but they're important for you to know, and today I'm going to explain the very basics of them. Now, it's important to distinguish between religious arguments and philosophical arguments. In religious arguments, people depend on, say, a theologian or a religious person depends on some kind of a scripture or body of work on which they base their faith, on which they base the things they believe. The problem is when asking the question, does God exist? A religious person might point to that scripture. For example, Christians would use the New Testament and the Old Testament, right, to maybe prove the existence of God, or Jews might use the Old Testament, Muslims might use the Quran, whereas, say, Mormons would use the Bible and the Book of Mormon, for example. But the problem is that somebody that has no interest or no reason to believe in that specific body of work, be it the Bible, the Quran, whatever the religious person is using as evidence, is not going to have faith in that. They have no reason to have faith in that body of work, and so you can't point to that as evidence for the existence of God. If you were to take the Bible and read the very first verse, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, that wouldn't mean anything to somebody that has no faith in, say, the Bible or anything like that, right? And so you have to come up with these other ways of presenting your arguments that don't involve a religious explanation based in some kind of scripture. So it's important to know these arguments, whether you're somebody who is religious or who believes in God and wants to kind of have a conversation with somebody about this, or if you're somebody that is perhaps an atheist. These are important arguments to know. I'll introduce you to these three basic arguments, or three of these basic arguments that are used quite often. And they're important to know. So whether you believe or don't believe, you got to know. All right. And so the first argument that I'll go over, all of these arguments came from Anselm of Canterbury and Thomas Aquinas from back in the day during the times of medieval philosophy. This is a time where philosophy and Christianity kind of came together, and these arguments kind of sprang out, and they've been around for a long time, and they're continued to be used in some form or another, all right? And so the first argument that we'll talk about is the cosmological argument, and you'll see this in some form or another being used. And the whole gist behind it, I think there's 4 points in the cosmological argument, but the basis of which is that everything in the universe, right? There's motion, right? The sun exists and the earth spins around the sun, right? And the moon spins around the earth, right? And all the planets orbit, different stars and things. And you have this kind of order to things, and there's things moving in the universe. If you know about astronomy, the universe is expanding like this, so everything's moving outward. And so the implication there is that it wasn't always moving just forever. If you go back in time, it wasn't just always moving forever and ever. And if the universe is currently expanding like this, then at some point it was less expanded, right? And there was a point in which the first movement came. And so some people say that that God is that necessary being, that first that unmoved mover that moved all the things into existence, right? Today in science, physics, astronomers, they might talk about the Big Bang, and that might be kind of the point where people agree that poof, everything kind of came into existence. But people who argue for the existence of God say there had to have been a first mover or a first cause of things. The same way in nature, we see things that are happening and everything is caused by something else. And you keep going back in time. And I think it was Thomas Aquinas who talked about the impossibility of an infinite regression, an infinite regress. And so you can't go back in time forever and have things continue to be caused by something else and caused by a cause by a cause, right? Eventually there has to be, if you go back in time far enough, a first cause. And so the cosmological argument says that God is that first cause. There had to have been some kind of thing that brought everything initially into existence, right? And so that's the basis. That's the basics of the cosmological argument. There's other points to it, but those are the points that are typically used in the cosmological argument. Of course, people might say, well, if God was the original mover of the universe and God was the original cause of everything that came into existence, well, what caused God? What created God, right? And that's a whole nother topic of discussion. They discuss this in philosophy and theology, religion, and it's all very interesting. And I encourage you to get into these discussions, but for now we'll stick to these three arguments that we're going to present. So the cosmological argument, if you regress backwards far enough in time, there's an original mover and there's an original cause to everything. And by the way, when we're talking about the existence of God, we're talking about simply that thing that brought everything into existence. And when we talk about it as God, we talk about it some kind of intelligent being, some kind of thing that was intelligent enough to create purposefully the universe, the world, the life we live, this planet, all the animals, people, and plants, and all the systems that are here. That's when we talk about God. We're not describing God in any other way, but simply seeing God as the creator. So when we discuss God or we discuss the existence of God and arguments for God, that's what we're talking about. We're not getting specific on which God, how many gods there were. We're just saying there was something that created everything. And so those are the arguments. So that's the first one, the cosmological argument. The second one that I'll go over that you might hear from time to time is a little different, and some people it takes them a minute to understand it. It's called the ontological argument. So we go from the cosmological to the ontological argument for the existence of God. Ontological comes from the word ontology. In philosophy, ontology is a branch in which we look at the nature of reality. What exists, what doesn't exist, and how does it exist, right? And so ontology talks about the existence of God and the being of God. The ontological argument was made famous by a fellow named Anselm of Canterbury, and it goes a little bit like this. If you think of God as if you think of the greatest thing that could possibly exist, right? If you think of like what could be the best thing that could exist, the greatest thing, the most powerful thing, the most wonderful thing that could exist in the universe, you really can't think of anything bigger or better than, say, God. That's how Anselm saw it. And the way he also saw things are that we could see things in two ways. We could see things in our mind as something we imagine in our mind, right? We can think of Harry Potter. We can imagine Harry Potter and all his adventures with Ron and Hermione, right? And that exists in some way, in some sense. And we can also think of things as existing in reality. When we talk about Harry Potter does not exist in reality. It's a character, it's fiction, much like a unicorn, right? Or mythical creatures, right? But something is better if it exists in reality. Right, and so you kind of get the idea that he's saying that you can have an idea of something, and then you can have something that exists in reality. And it's better if something exists in reality. Now, he says that if we think of the greatest possible thing that could exist, then that thing is probably out there, right? The thing that's out there is the greatest thing in existence, and the greatest thing we can think of, he says, is God. And since it would be better if God existed not only in our mind, or the idea of God, but it would be better if he existed in reality, and that would be the only way that he could actually exist as the best possible thing in existence. Otherwise, it's just in our heads, it's just an idea. So the best possible thing that can exist is God, and since it would be better for God to exist in reality as opposed to just in our minds. Therefore, Anselm says God must exist. And this is kind of a logical thing that he followed, and it's been argued back and forth whether this is a good argument or not, the ontological argument. Again, God is the best possible thing we can think of, and out there somewhere there's the best possible thing in existence. And since it's better for God to exist in reality rather than just in our minds, therefore God exists. That's the kind of gist of the ontological argument. And like I said, people have argued for it, people have argued against it. People think it's a good argument, other people think it's not so great. What do you think? Let me know in the comments if you like the cosmological argument or the ontological argument for God better. Now, throughout history, they have debated this, and they continue to this day. I've heard people say that's a terrible argument, and I've heard the arguments against it, but we won't go into too much detail, perhaps in another video, against these arguments. But you can take it for what it's worth and what you think. Is it logical? Does it work? Is it better than the cosmological argument? I had a philosophy instructor, surprisingly, who thought this was a very good argument for God, because it kind of uses you could sit there and think about it and say, yeah, God has to exist. And other people like more of the physicality of the world when they think of the cosmological argument, there being an original thing that created everything, right? So that's the cosmological argument and the ontological argument. The third argument for the existence of God has also gone through several iterations throughout time. People have argued for it and against it, and it is the teleological argument. Teleological refers to the word teleos, or telos as it's been said, and it refers to something being created for a purpose, right? And so the teleology of, say, a fork is to eat your steak with, right? Or eat your spaghetti with it, or your meatballs, or whatever it is you're eating, something you got to stab and eat it. So the the teleology of a fork is that it's designed so that you can use it to eat your food. The teleology of a spoon would be so that you can scoop things into your mouth, right? Of a shovel to dig things. And so things are created for a purpose. Now, this argument was part of, I think, Thomas Aquinas' arguments that later became more popularized by other philosophers, but eventually became what we know today as the intelligent design argument. And today, the version of this argument for God is that you can look at the world, you can look at the complexity of the universe, the complexity even of a single-celled organism, a single animal cell, and you can see how infinitely complex it is. And there are people today alive who are great inventors and builders and engineers, and they can build amazingly complex machines, computers, systems within systems. You can build space shuttles and computers and cars and space shuttles and cars that depend on computers, right? And it just get infinitely more complex. Well, not infinitely, but to a point we can understand it. Whereas nature is that much more complex. And therefore, if it takes human intelligence to create these inventions that we have, to create computers, robots, and things, how much more intelligence would be needed to create this complex universe, the complex laws of the universe in physics and in biology, right? And somebody like Richard Dawkins attacks this argument, I think, in The Blind Watchmaker. That's a popular book, especially for those who want to read about arguments against the existence of God. And this is one of the arguments that he tears apart, or at least proposes to tear apart. And it's important to realize that when we look at the existence of God, that we don't bias ourselves into thinking that we have to describe the existence of God as you might understand him in a religious sense, right? So don't try to prove your religious beliefs about God. But in this way, with these arguments, you won't even have to do that. For example, a lot of people say they might grow up, say a Christian. Maybe their family was they were all creationists, and they taught you that the Bible, Genesis 1 and 2, is very literal, and that God created the earth in 6 days, rested on the seventh, and created man during that week, and everything in existence in that 1 week. Now, some people believe it's a literal 7 days, other people think not. But perhaps you were taught this, and then you went to school and you learned all about science and evolution, and you thought, well, this doesn't really jive with what I've been taught, right? But you saw evidence and proofs for evolution, and so you kind of set aside your beliefs in God and your religion and decided there's no God because you believe that disproves, say, the Bible, which that's scripture that you used. But the problem there is that you're simply setting aside your religious beliefs, thinking that you've logically gotten rid of this idea of there being a creator God, when in fact that's not the case. You're rejecting a religion, you're not rejecting the existence of God so much, right? So it's important to think about it that way. If, say, you are an atheist for that reason, and it's perfectly fine if you don't believe in God, and you continue to investigate these things, but it's important to realize exactly why and what it is you abandoned. Did you abandon religion? Did you abandon that particular scripture, the Quran, the Bible, the Book of Mormon, whatever it is? Or did you really abandon the idea of God? Really, did what you learned really prove or disprove the existence of God? And it's important to keep that in mind. So the intelligent design argument has been around, it continues to go around, and many people find this quite compelling. If you take any anatomy class or any biology class as it gets more complex, or even chemistry, any in-depth classes as it gets really complex, you study the complexity of life, the complexity of the universe. And many people say you can't have this complexity without there being some kind of designer, in the same way that people can't create space shuttles and send them off into space, right, without some kind of a designer. If you see design, there must be a designer. And there are lots of arguments against this. Like I said, Richard Dawkins talks about this, and you're going to agree with them or you're not. You're going to agree one way or the other for the intelligent design, the teleological argument, okay? So when we talk about this argument, a lot of people might accept it or throw it away right away. Depends on their view of things and if they believe they're good enough arguments. A lot of times, atheist biologists who don't believe in intelligent design, they'll point out that the universe, or rather biology, say if we talk about organisms coming into existence, did God create them? They'll talk about them being much less complex originally, right? And so the super complexity that came into existence came about over time. So it started as very non-complex organisms and eventually developed very complex systems over time. And one could say, well, still, that's pretty incredible that these systems are in place where life can develop and adapt to its environment all on its own. And not only that, but self-create, reproduce, self-reproduce, self-adapt, and create itself into something more adapted to living in the universe that it lives in. And so even that could be a counter-argument to those who say that life developed in complexity over time. It's still pretty cool. It's still pretty awesome and still pretty amazing that something like that could happen all on its own. But perhaps that's where you feel. Do you think that life developed all on its own with increasing complexity over time? Or do you think that it was some kind of program, some kind of device, some kind of intelligent designer that created the system within these systems that are incredibly complex? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, those are the three arguments for the existence of God. The cosmological argument, everything had to go back to a beginning, an original mover, an original cause of everything that came into existence. 2, the ontological argument, things are better if they exist in reality than if they exist only in imagination. And if you imagine the greatest possible thing that could exist, well, that would have to be God. And God would be even better if he existed in reality. Therefore, God exists. That's the ontological argument. And the teleological argument says that everything was created with a purpose in a way, but now we kind of look at that as the intelligent design argument. It's evolved over time. Those are the three arguments. So now, if you are a religious-minded person, you can give three arguments for the existence of God without resorting to pointing to a religious text that you believe in dearly, right? And if you are an atheist, you learn the basics of three arguments that you might hear from people that might try to convince you that God exists. Or maybe you find one or all three of these arguments compelling. Let me know in the comments. Do you believe in God? And if so, why or why not? Tell me in the comments, and be sure to like this video. I appreciate it. Thank you for sticking to the end. Again, if you're interested in life's mysteries, in the questions about life, about this universe, about existence, if you're interested in philosophy, theology, unexplained things, be sure to subscribe, like this video, and if you enjoyed this, share it and add your commentary. And if you discuss this in the comments, make sure to be civil, and check out this channel for future videos on various questions about the mysteries of life. Anyway, I'm Edgar Ortega, handsome blind guy. I'll see you, or you'll see me, in a future video. Thanks for watching.